pleased to introduce Kelsey Gonzalez this morning. Kelsey grew up in Akron and studied visual communication design at OSU. She works full-time as a UX designer at IBM, and she also owns a small design shop to share her passion for fostering empowerment and positivity. Her works are inspired by books, art, travel, and people. And while Kelsey and I have a lot in common already, my favorite interest that we share is our love of travel. We talk about it all the time. And her number one life rule really speaks to me. And it is always plan your next trip while you're on your current trip. And I was guilty of that as of like a week ago. So I totally understand that. So in this Creative Mornings talk, Kelsey is actually going to share her personal experience of improving mental health and well-being by integrating design thinking practices into daily life. And I think we could probably all use that right now. So speaking this morning on the theme of design, please join me in welcoming Kelsey Gonzalez.
Okay, so thank you again for having me here. I was really excited to be here today and talk with Autumn when she asked me to do this. Of course, a little bit like, oh my gosh, what would I talk about? But I think I found something that hopefully is relatable to most of you here today. And hopefully you can find ways to apply design thinking practices into your daily life. So as Autumn mentioned, I'm here to talk about October's theme for Creative Mornings, which is design. And I will be talking about my personal experience of improving my mental health and well-being by integrating design thinking practices into my own life. So to get a little bit personal, throughout the last year, obviously, the pandemic has been a huge disruptor for all of us in different ways, and myself included. And like some of you here, my mental health honestly struggled the most that it ever had in the last year. So for me, that meant I was constantly exhausted. I was sleeping a lot more than usual. I wasn't exercising, and I was working my full-time job all day. And then I was continuing to do freelance work all night. And of course, just not going anywhere. So moving from room to room in my house and just being on the computer all the time. And I was kind of just moving through the motions of each day with a general heaviness. And if most of you here hopefully will understand mental health, then you know that it doesn't really matter how much you have or how many people are in your life supporting you. And sometimes you just kind of feel a little bit stuck. And I think the pandemic brought that out in a lot of people. And I just want to note too that I am blessed with a very great life. So feeling this low every single day was extremely frustrating. And this was kind of the pivot point where I woke up one day and I decided that this is when I needed to make a change because my lifestyle was negatively affecting every single aspect of my day. And at this point, you're probably all wondering, how does any of this relate to design? So at this point, I started to think about all of the ways I could redesign my day to try and improve my mental health and my well-being. And as I was doing that, I realized that I was subconsciously applying UX design practices to my own life. And this is when I realized that I actually was crossing over my professional skills into my personal life. And this isn't a new idea. There are plenty of books on this topic, plenty of talks on this topic. And I didn't realize that all of the tools that I needed to make a change to my own life were right in front of me all along. So as designers, we're trained to build empathy. We're trained to be curious. We're trained to prototype. And of course, to continue iterating all the time. But in this case, my life was the prototype and I didn't have to feel stuck. Well, let me start by explaining what UX is. Most of the people here, I'm sure on the phone, know what user experience design is, but if you don't know what this is and you're in kind of a different creative realm, let me explain what that is. So every single day, anything that you touch or interact with, that's part of a user experience. It could be a product, it could be an app, it could be a website, it could be a service. And one example would be something like Airbnb. So they display a huge amount of information in a format that's consumable through a clear and minimal interface. You can easily customize it. You can show specific options that fit your needs. So maybe something like allowing pets, maybe free parking, self check-in. And then booking a stay through Airbnb or some kind of experience, it actually requires very little effort on the user side. UX design is about creating a positive experience for users at every single touch point and with every interaction. And when it's well done, good design is invisible. And we don't think often about the thought process that leads up to those final products, but we simply know the experience is seamless and enjoyable. But when we encounter something that's poorly designed, we are quick to pinpoint its flaws and will go out of our way to avoid using that product, app, website, or service later on. And UX designers are the people that are on the other sides of these products and services and websites, and we're the ones that are creating those experiences. So we continue to get feedback from users, we prototype, we iterate, and we improve the design over and over and over. And good design simply makes people love using your product. Good design is user-centered, it's intentional, and above all, it should make users happy. So now I'll talk a little bit about who can use UX design practices. So it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter your education level, it doesn't matter what you do for a living. Every single person on this call today can use UX design practices. And as a UX designer, design thinking is something that I do every day, but to me, design is not only about being creative, it's also about solving problems. Anyone can solve a problem, and therefore anyone can use design thinking tools and practices to do so. And life actually is a lot like a UX project, and we have the power to iterate as often and as frequently as we'd like. So this is a design thinking tool called an experience map or an as-is map. And I'll take a second to let you all digest what's here because it is a lot of information, but this is a tool that helps us to understand users' journeys, their thoughts, and their feelings throughout the day, as well as help to identify highlights and pain points. In this case, in this specific example, I am the user. So now I'll walk you through kind of what a typical day looked like for me in the last year, mostly in 2020. Thankfully, it's not as much like this now, but I'll get to that part later. So usually I snooze at least 3 alarms every single morning, and I ignore every single one of them, at least for an hour, sometimes more than that. So obviously not a very restful last hour of sleep, and I'm annoying my husband in the process. So I've overslept now, and I wake up irritated because now I don't have time to exercise. I don't have time to walk the dog. And I'm a little bit mad at myself because I said I was going to get up early and I slept through everything. And now I'm rushing around to get my day started. So at this point, I've got a couple of minutes to run to the kitchen. I'll make a coffee, maybe grab something like a granola bar and call it my breakfast. And I'll run from the kitchen to the office. And usually I'm still in my pajamas. And this is when I start my work day and log on to my computer. And then before I know it, it's almost 2 o'clock. And this is when I debate whether I should take 15 minutes before my next meeting and take a shower at this point, or if I should make a quick lunch and go sit outside and actually leave my house for a little bit, for a couple of minutes. So usually this is where I opt to go outside and just get a little bit of sunlight shining onto my face. And then I'll go inside, think about making another coffee, hoping it'll give me a second wind. And even though I'm excited about all the projects I'm working on at work, usually at this point of the day, I wish I could take a nap. So before the end of the day, I've got a couple more working sessions, so I need to be really productive. And I'm starting to feel a little bit distracted by the time 5 o'clock rolls around. So I decide to finish some of my work a little bit later in the evening, and I close my laptop and I'll take a much needed break at this point. And this is when in the summer, I'm very thankful for my pool that I have in my backyard. So I'll go either float in the pool or maybe I'll take a little bit of a nap. And from here, I'll go inside, sit on the couch, watch the news, scroll social media, which all of those things end up making me feel much more stressed, much more worried about what's going on in the world. So then I kind of shut everything off and just go make dinner. And then I'll take an evening walk with my husband and my dog to unwind. Then at this point, it's almost 8 o'clock. I'm starting to feel a little bit stressed about the work that I didn't get to finish earlier in the day. But then I remember I have a freelance project that I still have to complete too, that I've been working on for a couple of weeks, and I'm just feeling totally burned out. It's 9 o'clock and I can't keep my eyes open. And no joke, I literally went to bed probably at 9 o'clock or earlier every single day of 2020 and wouldn't wake up until 8:30 or maybe 9 o'clock right when I started my day. So that was a little bit of what my life looked like in 2020. So as you can see, my day was a little bit of a roller coaster emotionally. And I started to notice that the low points of my day were right when I woke up and during those kind of after work hours when I would fill my time with watching the news or mindlessly scrolling social media or sitting on the couch. I also noticed that I felt worse when I was putting off work that I needed to finish, especially freelance work. And I was starting to actually dread doing any of that work in the evenings. And I felt like I was constantly glued to screens all day long. The best parts of my day were when I was able to get outside or make an actual nutritious meal to fuel me to think a little bit better, and during evening walks with my husband and our dogs. So after all of that, I would love for you all to think about your biggest pain points that you're experiencing either right now or maybe it was in the last year or so. So on the other side of the spectrum, this is something that's called an ideal experience or 2B map. So it's similar to the current experience map, but on this side, we're looking at the user's ideal journey or their future journey. So again, looking at the journey, thoughts, feelings throughout the day. And this is where new ideas can be generated to alleviate those pain points that we previously talked about. So in this case, I am the user again, and I asked myself if I could completely redesign my day, what does that look like? And how can I make things easier and better? Of course, I want my day to start a lot slower. I want to be able to enjoy my coffee in the morning, get outside for a quick walk, maybe some exercise, and even have time to eat a real breakfast and hopefully change into normal clothes. So then I would take time in the morning to be heads down on any design work that I needed to get done. That was the most high priority task for me for the day, uninterrupted. And this would help me to feel more accomplished and ready to be productive in the rest of my day's meetings and working sessions with my team. And then, of course, I would have a full hour to eat my lunch, make sure I get outside, read a book. And then, of course, being on the computer all day in my current experience leads me to decide to completely cut out the freelance work. So I want to make space to be more creative. I want to make more of a positive impact on causes that are important to me. I want to be able to practice self-care, be more present in my relationships. And I knew that I needed that time to get away from my desk in order to come back rejuvenated, inspired, and have the ability to do my best work. So I asked you all to think about your biggest pain points. Now I want you to think about your ideal life and what that looks like for you. And this can apply to anything. It could be, maybe your mental health situation. It could be maybe your garden and what it's yielding. Like, why are your tomatoes not yielding as much as they were last year? What are you doing differently? So think about those kinds of things. So from this point forward, I've got a couple of ideas about how I can live a more balanced life, but I need to know how I can prioritize those. And this is where a priority grid comes into play, another simple UX tool. So I can map some potential solutions here and decide what is most important versus what is the most feasible. And in that top right section, I'm actually surprised by how many simple items I can do every single day. So I can easily design my day to be more active, get outside more, and saying no to freelance to make space for things that are more enjoyable to me. And I can even use my design skills to make an impact on causes that I care about. So all of these design thinking exercises, they helped me to realize my need for purposefulness and intentionality. And although my bigger ideas may not be possible under pandemic circumstances, I'm able to concentrate on things that I can control, not the things that I can't. And of course, throughout the pandemic, there were a lot of things that we cannot control. So this for me meant focusing on smaller incremental adjustments and setting micro goals that are feasible right now to achieve positive change in my life. So you've thought about your pain points, you've thought about what your ideal day looks like. So now what kinds of solutions would be best for you and most feasible for you in this moment in time. So one area for me was saying no to freelance. And I've always done a ton of freelance work. I've learned a lot from doing it. I've worked with some great clients, but it started to feel more like a chore for me, and I didn't have the energy to continue doing it. So I knew it was time to take a break from it. And I also just want to recognize that I'm extremely grateful to be in a position where I am, to have been able to say no to extra work and extra money because I work for a company that treats me well, especially when during a time, there's so many people that have lost their jobs or are facing financial hardships. So just to be clear on that. But with saying no to freelance, I was able to make the space to be more creative. And this is where I asked myself, how would I design for me instead of designing for other people? And one of those ways is illustrating. So I've always loved to draw, doodle, all of those things. And I haven't done it, honestly, in probably a couple of years. And recently I've been able to make time to come back to that. And I can draw only when I'm feeling inspired, and I don't have to do it when I'm burned out or don't have the energy or just don't have the time. And there's no deadline, there's no stress for it to be perfect. So some of these are the illustrations that I've made over the last couple of months and over the last year or so. A couple other areas of focus for me were unplugging. So just in general, unplugging has been something that's really worked for me. Spending more time outside, supporting small businesses and artists that I love. So buying their art, maybe actually I'm going to plug here, Diaspora on campus, the sushi spot, one of my favorite places in the world. And we got takeout from there as much as possible throughout the pandemic. So hopefully you all try it because it is a hidden gem. So supporting small businesses that I love and artists that I love, supporting and donating to causes that I care about. And then of course, being more active, reading a lot more, paying attention to what I'm eating and drinking. Going to therapy was huge, journaling, meditating, gardening, and then cooking and trying new recipes. But I'll also say that throughout all those things that worked, there were some things that didn't work, like a watercolor class I took over the summer. This was not for me. It was fun to get outside. We were at Schiller Park in German Village doing this, but my very first class was watercolor painting figures walking by. And you should have seen like the explosion that my brain had when that's the first class I showed up to. And that didn't go well for me. I probably won't do it again, but it was a learning experience. And I also only have 2 pictures here because I realized that nobody really takes photos of things that they don't enjoy doing. So now, how do I measure results? How do I know that these changes that I was implementing were working for me? So one important thing in UX design is that we always measure results. We always measure outcomes, and this helps us to continue iterating and ensure improvements are being made. So to do this, for me, I used an app to track my anxiety, stress, and depression scores. And the first time I used it on the left, you can see my scores were extremely high. And after a couple of weeks of making small incremental changes, I did another assessment and my scores were significantly lower. And of course, I was still a little bit skeptical at this point, thinking like, is this really working, or am I just like thinking it's working? So after another few weeks, I did another assessment. And this was kind of the proof, I think, that I needed to see the changes I was making really were working for me. And I haven't done an assessment in a couple of months. I honestly haven't even opened an app in a couple of months. But I've noticed a couple of things about myself so that I can keep track without it. So when I'm feeling low, I tend to write and journal more. I want to be alone. And I notice that when I'm happier, I draw, I create more, and I want to be more social. So I noticed that I had more energy throughout this time. I was less distracted. I was sleeping a lot less than I was previously, but I was much more rested. And I was doing a lot better work. I was being more productive. And of course, I was being a better partner, friend, daughter, sister, and I was more present in all of my relationships. So experience mapping and prioritizing your needs are a few of the design thinking exercises that you could apply to your own life. And these were what helped me find ways to improve my mental health and well-being. And at this point, I'd love to say that I had some kind of epiphany that led me to find something I'm extremely passionate about, or, my higher purpose that we're all seeking all the time. But that's not the case. I didn't really have a big epiphany, but this is also say too, it's not that I've never had a bad day since then. That's not the case. So it's not one of those things where it's like, hey, these all worked and I'm totally fine now. But compared to a year ago, I do have much better mental health. I do feel a lot happier, and I'm still iterating and reflecting all of the time to learn and continue making improvements to my life. And our lives give us the opportunity to design the experiences that we're seeking, and to live with intentionality and with purpose. And like I mentioned before, you'll try some things that really work for you. You'll also try some things that don't work for you. But life is like a UX project, and you can keep trying and you can learn from it and get better. The trick for me was not setting unrealistic goals. I met myself where I was in that moment, and what works today may not necessarily work tomorrow. For example, last year, therapy was a godsend to me. This year, I don't really feel like that's making that much of a difference in my life. So I kind of, is one of those things that maybe I'll go to it sometimes, but I don't feel like I need it as much as I did last year. So we are we are all the designers of our own lives, and this can also apply to more specific areas of our lives. So gardening, maybe cooking, maybe traveling, and any of us can use design thinking tools to make improvements. So I encourage all of you to reflect on how you can apply design thinking practices into your lives every single day. Thank you.
Kelsey, thank you so much for that. I find was incredibly helpful to me, and I literally want to look at what I've done in my life recently and where I found happiness and what I need to give up. Like, you're an inspiration in that way, and I so appreciate the guidance to do this. So I'm going to get started. I know people will have questions and want to get involved in the conversation, but since I'm the host, I get to go first. So you asked us to think about our ideal life. My ideal life includes your pool. Can I add that to my life design?
You can come over anytime you want, but we did actually just close it yesterday, and it's honestly the saddest day of the year every year. So.
Okay, on to my real questions. So what is this app that you use, this assessment app? I'm so curious.
I think it was called Sandvello, I believe it was the name of it. I would have to look at my phone, which is in the other room, but I will get back to you on that.
Cool, that sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I know that you talked about the watercolor class not working, and it was something that you wanted to try, and you were open to it, and you're creative, and you're like, yes, maybe this could be a thing that brings me happiness. So I realized that was one of the iterations that you were like, nope, not going down that path any further. I'm turning around. Were there any other times where you felt similarly, like you really thought something would help, and then it kind of maybe brought you more stress, and you were like, I'm totally iterating right now and going in a different direction?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think of some other things. I think like I had all these ideas in my head about maybe doing like more photography and like, I don't know, going to a park and just kind of walking around and doing stuff like that. But I found that wasn't really my thing either. And it was like too much energy to spend on learning new stuff and trying to make sure it was perfect and like other things in that sense. So that was something that didn't work for me. I'm trying to think what else off the top of my head, and I can't think of anything else at the moment, but I'll think about that as we continue to talk.
I think that honestly, personally, this would have been really difficult information for me to hear in the middle of last year, because I would have been so overwhelmed with how difficult everything was that, like, if somebody tried to tell me exactly how to fix everything or be better, I don't know that I could have mentally dealt with that. But this year, I do feel like I have space to get better, and things are often on the upswing, and I can apply this to my life. So I'm done taking up the space for questions, and obviously it doesn't have to be questions. If anybody wants to share maybe how you maybe were designing your life, how you were doing these UX things on your life, but didn't even really realize that's what you were doing. I'm so curious to hear about other people's experiences.
I think one of the things I got, thank you very much, Kelsey, for your wonderful talk. One of the things I got underlying all of this is the notion of designing your own life and what to do and making that first choice. I think so much of this, the pain from what I get from your story as well as our own lives is when we feel we're not in control. We don't have the ability to make a choice, right? And it clearly it's very important to recognize that that the ability to choose about what and even how to do things is really important at countering these pain points. Part of it is, I mean, your points on reflection and self-awareness is sort of the counter of the pain which is caused by just pursuing life on autopilot, feeling you have to just respond and react to everything that life is throwing at you as opposed to taking charge. And I'm reminding of an old aphorism of saying that happiness, which is, you know, sort of underlying all this, happiness is a choice. You can choose to be painful and out of control, or you can choose, at least in some small ways and growing ways, I think, as your example has shown, that you can take control of things you thought weren't in your control before, and you can make the choice to be out of pain and happier. So thank you. Thanks for your talk.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And that's true. It's honestly, it could be the smallest thing. Like maybe you notice taking a walk once a day makes you feel a little better, or maybe it's just your way of, even just if you're not going through a mental health crisis or having mental health issues, maybe it's your way of disconnecting from work and then you come back refreshed with like better ideas, newer ideas, because you can take that time to walk and get away. And that's something that I found is really important for me, is to actually like completely shut down and not think about work, not think about freelance stuff has been really helpful, like I mentioned. So I really have enjoyed doing that because I feel like I'm a better teammate at work. I'm a better person to be around in general. And it's just been really helpful for me, just making very, very small changes.
Kelsey, we have a question in the chat from Elizabeth, and she says, Kelsey, thank you. Do you have any themes for different phases of your life? Which is such an interesting question.
Okay, Elizabeth, do you mind if I ask you to elaborate a little bit more about what you mean by different themes for phases?
Hi, Kelsey. Okay, themes. Like, I guess like this works really well for a certain phase of your life, but maybe there are multiple phases of your life, or maybe you have to redo this. So I'm wondering if you can apply that to design as well. Like sometimes they come up with a theme or a concept. I'm curious if that could apply to this, like if it's even like fall, winter, summer, spring, something like that.
Yeah, I guess so. So for me, I noted my pool in the backyard. Obviously, when it's nice out, that's great. But in Ohio, we have awful winters. I hate winter. I definitely feel my mood really depleting in those winter months, which is interesting because I was born in winter, so it doesn't really make sense to me. But I think for me, like trying to stay active in the winter months has been helpful. Obviously last year, like gyms were shut down and stuff, but we installed a heater in our garage, so that was helpful. And I'm not gonna lie, like I don't do these things every single day, so I'm not gonna act like I do these things every day and I'm great now. If I can work out like 3 times a week at this point, that's a win for me. Or even like getting to the garage, even if I have like a 20-minute quick workout, like that's a win for me in the winter months. So I think it does apply to different phases, and it's kind of like reassessing like what your needs are throughout, like you said, with seasons, throughout those different seasons. Like how can you change it up a little bit to fit your needs in that moment?
I love that question. I'm glad that Kelsey asked you, Elizabeth, to kind of elaborate on that more, because I did want to know exactly what you were talking about, but I resonate with that in your question. What you said was exactly what I had assumed that you meant. And yeah, it is interesting. And by the season is definitely how I would probably think about that for my life. I actually spoke with a friend who lives in California the other day, and she was talking about how she's from Ohio. So she like understands all of the weather. And it was fascinating for her. She finds it really hard in California because the weather is so consistent to remember when things happened. So, for example, the last time I saw Kelsey before, pandemic time, I think we were at Ab India eating dinner, and I remember wearing a coat, and I think it was probably cold outside, and that, indicates that it was maybe like winter of 2019, 2020. And so my friend was like, I have no idea if these times with my friends are like 2 months ago or 2 years ago. She has no concept. So the phases of her life, I think, are different in that way, but it's a reason why, I do like Ohio, even though I hate winter as well. I do like Ohio.
I wanted to add really quickly. I think the thing that I love about design thinking is that it's flexible. I think a lot of times we go into planning our lives and we assume that whatever we plan to do is going to work out just the way that we think it is. And I love that design thinking is very has a flow to it. And I really like that you brought up the part about using data along the way to sort of a litmus test to make sure that what you were doing is really worth your time. And I think that's so important because there's so many times in our lives that I feel like when we are the most unhappy, it's because we're not looking at the data. Like we're just like, yep, this is what society told me that I was supposed to do to be happy. And I'm following the recipe and it's not coming out the way I thought it would. And I don't know what's going wrong. And I think design thinking helps you to open your mind to being open to, changing what you thought was going to work initially to something else to fit, what the data is telling you. And, I think you working for IBM can certainly appreciate that if you use the same design models that you used at the beginning of IBM, you guys probably wouldn't be where you are today. And I think that openness to going off the original plan and going off the beaten path, I think can really lead to that happiness that you're talking about in your life.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I will say too, like the things that are working for me and the suggestions that I've made, those are just suggestions. I'm not a life coach. This might not work for you at all, but it's definitely worth like trying different things and kind of just paying attention to where you're at. And as I mentioned previously, like this isn't a new idea at all. I had a couple of resources on that last slide. If you guys want those again, I'll send them to you. But one is a book called Designing Your Life and then Designing Your Work Life. Those are two different books that I read that have been super helpful. And then like for me, a book called This Is Your Brain on Food, that was super helpful too, to start paying attention to what I was eating more and things like that. But like I said, like this might not apply to you in that sense. You might be living a perfectly happy life, and I hope that you all are. But I've also seen a talk similar to this a friend of mine had done for our women's group with IBM, and it was on the UX of gardening. Like she's an avid gardener, it's her hobby, but she also loves it so much. So she applies these principles to her gardening habits, and it's so interesting to see the outcomes for that. So you can apply it really to any aspect of anything that you're doing. It doesn't have to be your mental health or your entire life kind of wrapped into one piece. It could be a very specific part of what you're experiencing.
Kelsey, have you been surprised by anything, like pleasantly surprised by a choice of something that you, whether it was new to you or whether it was something you had already done, but just maybe the way that you brought it into your life or scheduled it or whatever, that was surprising in a positive way?
Yeah, I think that for me, paying attention to what I was eating was like the number one thing. So the book I mentioned, This Is Your Brain on Food, it's honestly none of the information in it is shocking. It's like, stay away from sugar, stay away from white bread, and like those things I love. I grew up eating pasta every single Sunday. So one of those things that I was like, oh, maybe I should eat this a little bit less because I was eating bread like multiple times a day. And it's not like, for me, it wasn't like, let's go on a diet and cut all these things out completely. It was just like paying attention more and eating more intuitively to kind of notice what was helping me feel better versus feel worse. So that was surprising, I think, for me, also because I found that I was sleeping a lot better. Like I was feeling well rested. I wasn't waking up in the middle of the night. I wasn't tossing and turning. I I wasn't snoozing my alarm. I felt so much more energized to the point where I could wake up either without an alarm, or I could wake up on my first alarm. So I'm sure my husband is grateful for that too, because that was not fun for him for a couple of months.
So you're saying that a change to what you're eating in a, improving your diet basically, helped you not have multiple alarms?
Yeah, it really did. And I
Oh
also
my
too, like we went to Florida for a couple of weeks, and that was honestly amazing too. Like I would wake up every single day at 6:30 and I would walk to the beach and watch the sunrise, and that was like life changing. Like I wouldn't even have to set an alarm for that. And I haven't done that in a very long time. So that was really fun too, because then you get to enjoy this peaceful, quiet morning and you're starting your day just like in a great mood. And of course, I mean, that was not in Ohio, so that obviously makes a huge difference too. But that was something that was a big noticeable change for me also.
Wow. I am hearing that. I am a person who, I set 3 alarms for this morning, and of course I hit snooze on all of them. So I totally get that. And I just thought that it was part of who I am as a night owl, but apparently maybe I do have some control over it. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. I didn't really connect that before.
Hi, Kelsey, I just wanted to say thanks for sharing about like with vulnerability, your struggles related to mental health, and then how you were able to, find a therapist that was really supportive for you. I feel like all of that is really important and helpful for people to hear at this time when so many folks are struggling. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brandy. Just the vulnerability that it took to share a lot of these personal things and how you've, applied design and UX to that is really great and really generous of you.
Yeah, I just want to up that one more time. It's been, like you're so insulated because of the pandemic. Like the last year was like, it felt like, I was the only one going through something like that. So it's just so helpful to, hear you kind of chat about your experience. And the framework that you presented just gives me kind of like so much structure to something that I was experiencing. But yeah, really helpful. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that.
Was anybody else taking screenshots like I was? Yes, I love that multiple people were. Yeah, for sure. I especially loved, I don't even know what you call it, the feasibility chart. Is that what you call it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I specifically really was excited about that screenshot because while obviously our lives are not the same and mine would be very different, I think I just need the concept of, how to put lists in that place so I can see what should I focus on? Like what would work for me so much better than other things. So
yeah, and I'll say too, it's actually we use priority grids a lot at work, and it's super helpful in terms of like design sprints if you're talking about something like that. So usually a design sprint is like 2 weeks long. So it's basically like what's the most high priority item and what's the most feasible with my dev team to be able to build within the next 2 week span. And then you kind of have like an overarching goal that you want to get to, but what are these like mini incremental sprints that I can use to get to that larger goal? So that's super helpful too in that sense, which isn't really a life thing, but that's what we use like every single day. And I find those to be extremely helpful to kind of align a team and find common goals and then figure out like, okay, in the next 2 weeks, this is what's possible right now. And then we'll get to that larger goal in the next couple of waves.
yeah, that is, I actually can kind of see that in a way that's related to life in that, so I'm not trying to like be like, oh my gosh, like failure isn't a real thing. That's not what I mean. But sometimes when I'm interested in doing something new with my business and I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if it's going to benefit me, if it's going to be so much work that it doesn't make sense for me to continue, if it's not successful. I've kind of naturally always viewed those as like projects rather than, you know, a new business idea failed for me or a new product that I offered to people failed for me. It's more of like, I'm interested to see how people might react to this. I'm going to try it out. And then I go for a month or a year, however long, and I realize, you know, maybe that's not what I thought it was, or it's not as fun as I thought it was. And so I let it go. And so I realized that, you know, a sprint for 2 weeks is not something I'm always going to lock into. But the fact that you can also choose as you make these different choices, as you choose different ways to design life, to know that you don't have to commit to them forever for them to be successful, I think is a super great point. Because trying out new stuff and not having to commit long term, that makes me more likely to try it out. I don't know how other people feel, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good practice. And it's kind of like you subconsciously were doing some UX design practices there.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's so, so cool.
IBM actually has a lot of these design thinking activities on a toolkit at the link that Cooper just posted in the chat. And I think some of the courses are offered for free. I can't remember exactly, but you can start learning about some of those activities and download templates from there, which is super helpful. So if you want to go and do a feasibility grid and you're like, wait, how did she have this set up again? You can kind of go there and check that out. And then of course, Google is your biggest friend. You can literally Google a billion other design thinking practices too, if you want to learn a little bit more about it. And that can be super helpful as well.
This is so helpful. This is awesome. Thanks for sharing this, Cooper. Also, Kelsey, I forgot to ask you this. I wanted to ask earlier. Do you, when you design all this stuff, do you use Tableau or do you use something else?
When I design, like what I showed?
When you're
on
doing
screen?
like charts and stuff, like
Oh, I guess it
data.
kind of depends. So, okay, so at work we use Mural a lot, which is
Okay.
probably like the main one I would say that we use, but you can also use these, like other tools that I use frequently are Sketch. And for this presentation, I just did everything in Keynote. And then of course, like pen and paper honestly work very well, and Post-it notes and putting them literally on your wall is so easy.
Yeah.
A whiteboard, like, you can literally do it with anything. So
Thank you guys again, everyone, for attending. I know that I have a 10 a.m. So we're gonna hop off soon, but Kelsey, thank you so much for all of this today. Your talk was amazing and I literally cannot wait to apply this stuff to my life. So thank you for that.